When we think about the conflict in Mexico, our minds usually jump straight to those brutal, chaotic images we see all over the news. But today, we're going to peel back that top layer. We're going to look into the shadows and see what's really going on.
Yeah, this is the story we all know, right? A relentless cycle of violence that just seems totally random and out of control. It really paints this picture of a nation that's just on the brink of collapse. But that narrative, as dramatic as it is, well, it actually hides a lot more than it explains.
So here's the big question we're going to dig into. What if all that violence we see isn't just chaos at all? What if it's actually the result of a calculated, strategic conflict that's being fought completely in the shadows? A war that has its own players, its own rules, and its own hidden objectives.
To really get a handle on this, we need a totally new way of looking at it. We need to understand this concept of a shadow war, because it completely reframes the entire situation.
Okay, so what is a shadow war? Well, you can pretty much forget everything you know about conventional warfare. There are no declarations of war here, no clear armies facing off on a battlefield. Instead, it's this fluid, undeclared conflict fought with intelligence, covert strikes, and targeted violence. And the lines between who's a friend and who's an enemy, they are constantly blurry.
What this really means is we're moving way beyond the simple idea of just, cops versus criminals. The players in this game are so much more sophisticated. We're talking about highly trained intelligence agents, elite military forces, and criminal organizations that operate with military-level precision.
To see this shadow war in action, the first thing we have to do is understand who's actually fighting. And the answer? Well, it's way more complex than you'd think. This is not a simple two-sided fight. Let's break down this fragmented battlefield.
So you've basically got at least 3 major factions, and each one of them has its own internal squabbles. You have the Mexican state itself, which is, let's just say, far from a unified team. You have the cartels, which have evolved into something way scarier than simple gangs. And then, of course, you have foreign players like the US, who have their own interests and agendas in the mix.
Now, here's where it gets really fascinating. The conflict within the Mexican state itself. On one hand, you've got the Civilian Intelligence Agency, CISEN. They're focused on the long game, political stability. But on the other side, you have military intelligence, and they are all about direct, kinetic action. As you can see here, these two sides have completely different goals, and it leads them to hoard information from each other, creating these dangerous rivalries and massive gaps in their operations.
And this is absolutely key. The cartels are masters at exploiting these exact gaps. When government agencies aren't talking to each other, it's not just inefficient, it's a massive strategic opening that the other side uses to survive and even to thrive. And all this leads us directly to the very engine of this conflict, the thing that fuels the fire: intelligence. In a shadow war, information is, without a doubt, the ultimate weapon. This really gets to the heart of it. The shootouts and ambushes we see on the news, they are not random outbursts. They're the final, visible step in a very long chain of surveillance, planning, and strategy. They are, as it says here, the tangible outcome of a huge intelligence effort. And this creates a perpetual motion machine, a kind of operational feedback loop. You can see how it works here. It all starts with gathering intel. That intelligence is then used to plan a violent operation. The outcome of that violence, whether it's a success or a failure, actually gives you new intelligence. And then finally, both sides learn from it and adapt their tactics. It's just a constant, escalating cycle of learning and fighting. Now, this relentless feedback loop has forced one side in particular to evolve dramatically. The cartels we see today are absolutely not the smuggling gangs of the past. They've become a totally new kind of enemy, and they're playing by a whole different set of rules.
I mean, just look at this timeline. You can see a very clear turning point. Back in the 80s, cartels were basically just logistics companies for drugs. But then came Los Zetas, a group formed by defectors from Mexico's own special forces. They brought military tactics and discipline to organized crime, and that changed everything.
This evolution means that cartels now fight like a modern military. They don't just shoot wildly, they plan coordinated, multi-pronged ambushes. They truly understand urban warfare, how to use the city itself as a weapon, and they build fortified compounds to defend their turf. And they're not just using guns. Their tech is incredible. They use encrypted communications to stay off the grid, surveillance drones to track government forces, and they even build their own improvised armored vehicles, these things called monsters, for direct assaults.
So what does this all add up to? It's what experts call a hybrid threat. We are no longer talking about simple criminals.
We're talking about a sophisticated, tech-savvy force that has completely blurred the line between organized crime and a military insurgency. They're directly challenging the state.
So you take all these pieces, the fragmented state, the intelligence feedback loop, the evolved enemy, and you put them all together. What you get is a picture of a conflict that isn't really heading towards any kind of clean conclusion. It's become a permanent battlefield.
And that right there is the reality of the Shadow War. It's a daily, silent conflict where any victory is just temporary, and the struggle is constant. It's not a problem that can be solved anymore. It's a condition that has to be managed.
Okay, so let's boil this all down. What are the key things to take away from this? First, the violence isn't just chaos, it's strategy. Second, this is a messy, multi-sided war with no clear good guys or bad guys. Third, it's an endless cycle where violence and intelligence just keep feeding each other. And finally, the enemy has evolved into something brand new and far more dangerous.
And all of this leaves us with a really difficult final thought. When the battle lines are invisible, when the enemy is always adapting, and when the state itself is fighting internally, what does victory even look like? It's a tough question, and honestly, it's one that strategists are still struggling to answer.